powers of council reference back to clearly delineating and mapping the parts of your community that are undeveloped and sensitive in the first place, right? So I wanted to go over this, having given you a little bit of background there. I don't want to get too far into the weeds on, the Commonwealth of PA and what does the PA DEP do versus we do. That's a whole presentation in and of itself. So you had already begun going through the powers of council. The one thing I noticed for number one is this: identify environmental problems, keyword being problems, meaning they have a solution, not environmental predicaments, like something that we have no power to address here in council. Like, maybe the ozone hole in Antarctica is growing, but we may not in our capacity here. That's more of a predicament potentially for in our limited, so I thought that was an important thing to point out. They should have solutions. And then number one is probably the most complex one. So I broke it down to make it a little more digestible. So first you have to identify the problems. Like we identified one that has probably a solution, which is that creek, the Imperial Creek in the municipality. There is almost certainly a solution to that. We know that because in Cherry Valley, that creek's IBI score went up as a result of human intervention. So we know there's other creeks in the county which had a low IBI score because of human action taken, the macroinvertebrate index increased. So that's a good example of a problem with a solution. And I think that's, and then so the council recommends plans and programs to the board for the promotion and conservation of the natural resources, and then for the protection and improvement of the quality of the environment. It's a lot, but it gives you some flexibility. And then number two, again, advisory, possible use of open lands within the township. I said undeveloped, open space. I like to think of as more as kind of like undeveloped lands, because open space is kind of fallen out of vogue lately, but and then number three, which you're on.
Well, what we were saying there is that we really need to know what those open lands are.
Yeah, I agree. And who owns them and what parcel ID, and that kind of goes to number four, is keep an index of all open space. This is just direct text from the ordinance. I like to say undeveloped. In the agenda, it says undeveloped. Open space and environmentally sensitive areas, publicly or privately owned, including but not limited to flood-prone areas, swamps. I don't like the use of the word swamp, but it's in the ordinance, so I had to put it there. We mostly have wetlands here in Monroe.
Does the township have flood maps, or they're in Monroe County?
There are FEMA 100-year flood maps, and that's what most municipalities are.
And do you know when the next event is going to take place, more or less? Did we go through any?
The next flood event?
Saying 100 years is just an estimate that it's going to happen about every 100 years.
Right, but do we have a kickoff point? Do we know?
I mean, we had 300-year floods in 2001, 1999, 2001, 2000.
Well, I know we had one in 2000 and what was it, 2005, 2006?
Yeah.
We haven't had one in some time.
That's a misnomer too, 100-year.
Yeah, it's so silly.
It's pretty arbitrary, isn't it? I mean.
And it also depends on which flood you're talking about, because it really depends. If you're talking about Delaware, if you're talking about the local streams and rivers.
So then you have the 500 year.
Right.
Okay, and that's like the big one, so.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because that would be part of this index so we don't currently have an index. We don't have a history, actually, anything material from Eric, I believe you're the only member here who participated in that. We don't here in the township have anything from that effort.
Okay.
I hate to say it, but we literally do not have any minutes, records, or anything from that. I've reached out to Natural Lands. I've reached out to the County Planning Commission. I've reached out to Nature Conservancy. I've reached out to PHLT. PHLT has ignored my communications. But Natural Lands was kind enough to provide me with some information, one of which is this draft here that I put together. So that's great, really grateful for their participation. So to answer a question that was addressed previously, I don't know what was discussed. I don't know which parcels were identified. My recommendation is that we do it de novo, and we request technical assistance from the County Planning Commission. to do so and create a map and utilize, and so we're gonna get to that because we're not on number 5, but that's just a comment that I wanted to make and let you know kind of what I've been doing to kind of prepare for this meeting. I promise I have been making every effort to prepare for this meeting, so.
And the other question I have is, now that we know that Sambo Creek is impaired, are there any remedies, or is there anything,
Oh, yeah.
any ongoing remediation to that particular, to address that problem?
That is, a great question. It actually is part of an MS4 permit, which our township.
MS4 means?
MS4, well, I should know that.
Okay.
Off the top of my head. MS4 permit is basically multiple stormwater sewage. Anyway, basically,
Well,
it's a
I'm not
permit
gonna
that
hold you to
identifies
it.
an impaired stream and pathways to make it unimpaired. And our municipality is charged with rectifying that situation
By diverting?
by a number of pathways that are delineated in that permit. And some of those pathways can be effectuated as recommendations of the board through this council. For example, and I really don't want to get too far in the weeds, but let's say, for example, the council finds that there's a number of very sensitive wetlands that are, feeder tributaries to that creek that are not currently protected, that could be protected, or riparian buffers, things of that nature. And so there are things we can do to help that situation. But again, I really don't want to get too far in the weeds. It's a great question, but again, I want to try to get to number 5.
Okay.
But Eric, do you have any access to any of that information that of the council you were on, or do you have any suggestions on?
I could look, see what I have. I'm trying to think. It was a while ago, but absolutely.
Yeah, if you have any emails that were sent,
I do.
yeah, you could forward them along. Maybe there's attachments, some sort of record.
Absolutely.
That would be super helpful for everybody, I think.
Are there any Pennsylvania state
No, it's fine.
training sessions that we should consider attending to become more knowledgeable on some of these subjects?
Probably.
Depends which subject you're interested in. There is an in-person conference later this year, which sort of piggybacks on that virtual conference.
Well, I would say one like that focuses on what we're talking about, an impaired stream, what the majority causes are, what the most probable causes are, what the solutions are for each one of those causes.
So you're talking specifically about.
When I got involved
water
with the
quality
planning commission,
education.
we got no education coming in.
Yeah,
And I dug around and found that there are a lot of training courses coming in at the planning commission that give you all kinds of information about what the municipal planning code is really saying. And how it should be used and what you can do and what you shouldn't do.
that's a great question. Yes, and there's so many different topics that go into kind of the question you're asking, like in terms of water quality
Well, pick
education.
the one that you know.
Water quality
Put
education,
it
let's
up
take,
high on the agenda.
let's
for
take
water
that,
quality.
yeah, let's take water quality, for example.
Right.
I have to find some and I can forward to the group. And you also have me, I can prepare presentations for you all.
I mean,
Yeah.
some of the ones that I attended for the planning commission would last maybe 2 hours
Yeah,
and they were virtual.
yeah.
They are now becoming, there are a lot more that are available, at least that I'm seeing now, that are in person.
Are you going to the PSAT's annual conference?
I could,
It's Julia's going, right? You know when that is?
I'm not sure.
I think it's next week.
Oh,
PSAT's
wow.
in Pennsylvania. What is it? Pennsylvania Supervisors Association, something, but they host lots and lots of these.
Planning
Right,
Commission
there's several
Association?
different.
That's not planning.
The Borough
PSEC.
Association.
It's not boroughs. PSATs is specifically for second-class townships. So, of which that makes up 98% of the state of Pennsylvania, geographically, not population-wise. I would think as opposed to getting into super the weeds on water quality, I don't know that that's necessarily the most valuable thing for this group, but getting an understanding, sort of like the overarching issues around just quality in general, and open space and, you know, the big, constant balancing act of, conservation and recreation. I mean, nothing in here talks about recreation, maybe that's intentional. Do you know if that is intentional? I mean, parks are used usually for recreation and conservation, not just conservation. I'm not seeing a lot of the recreation here, whereas possible use of open land areas can be
Yeah.
recreation. So I just don't know if there's no separate group for that, right?
There's in your township's code, there is provisions for a parks committee. So it's probably for that reason. The parks committee existed prior to the formation of the EAC, and so they had that kind of covered already.
But that's not, it's defunct, it doesn't operate.
It's defunct. It's done. We have the River's Edge, which is the one park in our municipality which needs the most help. So that's good. But to answer your question, I think it was intentional because of the existence of a pretty active parks committee. And so the supervisor, I would imagine, put this together with other intentions.
Okay.
In terms of general information about what you're talking about, general environmental information as it relates to water quality, so on. I'm wondering if there isn't, someone on the faculty at East Stroudsburg University who could put together a pretty comprehensive, presentation, somebody in the biology department say.
Yeah, or you could use me. I mean, I did it professionally for 3 years, so, you know,
Okay.
sometimes it's better to have, you know,
I have-
I could do it in-house. Or
I
could
think
have
what
invited
we should
speakers.
do here,
Yeah.
and to be sure that we do something, is ask Alec if he will come up with some possibilities of training, and I think your idea of East Stroudsburg is good, but I think we should take advantage of Alec too, because he does know an awful lot about this.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I did direct the Broadhead Watershed Association for 3 years, and this is like literally what I focused on, so I could probably speak with some authority on most of these questions that you have.
Well,
But you just
I
need to-
also would suggest
a lot of
that
these
each one of
topics-
us-
A lot of these topics have hour presentations in and of themselves.
I would suggest that each one of us, if we have a specific area that we'd like to get further education on, that you write Alex a note and say,
Yeah,
I'm interested in this, and then he can put together.
And maybe I have a suggestion too. I mean, hearing Mitch's comments about, you know, onboarding for planning commission, recognizing this is an entirely brand new group, it's been a defunct group. It seems like, I mean, I look at number 5 and I'm thinking, how can this group make, you know, some educated decisions on acquisition of property when the group's still trying to get our heads around what information we should go into such a decision. I wonder if it'd be valuable to have it for the next 6 meetings. I know you say an hour presentation, but I love things that are concise. 20-minute brief presentation at every one of the next 6 meetings. And that doesn't have to be you, but your job could be to find the 6
Yeah.
people.
absolutely.
To present.
Yeah.
And to identify what you think those 6 subjects should be. That would be the most
Yeah.
important.
And
So
I
that we
think
can have that
if-
onboarding. I don't know, does that sound?
That would be great.
We
Yeah,
should
that would be
all provide some input to Alex too, because there are areas I know some of us know about and some of us don't, so.
That's very important. Now, there is no organization, so We Can Serve PA is sort of like the PSATs for EACs. And it's to kind of come back to your question.
What are they called?
We Can Serve PA.
We Can Serve PA.
Yep, and they are the organization that most folks here actually attended that, and they're sort of the educational arm.
Well, that was the session.
Yeah. If you want, I can talk a little bit about, well, okay, so we've actually done all 5, and then number 6 was perform any duties assigned to supervisors. Yeah, so that is a great segue to kind of go over what we learned at the conference. Michael wasn't there. And I want to kind of go over
He
that.
was at a
But
supervisor.
just to confirm, I will, after this meeting, put together 6 subjects. And also take their feedback. 20-minute presentations. And I can either myself or I can find an invited speaker like folks from the Monterey County Planning Commission can speak, or from a land trust.
Yes. Land
I
trust.
could maybe talk about water quality, or maybe David, it would be great if we could get invited speakers to come educate, rather, you know, and so 100%, I would love to do that, and I appreciate the suggestion. Going to the We Can Serve PA,
Can I just add one thing to that? When we do that, can we see I need to see the information before it's presented?
Oh, you mean like a PDF presentation?
Well, right, because that way, it's not just one-way information. We can actually
Right.
have read it and be knowledgeable enough to discuss it and ask reasonable questions.
That is very reasonable.
Yeah.
Alex, when we get down to new business and you say discuss zoning map, resource metrics and Monroe County plan for clean water, that's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, Pat, you might wanna ask for a motion to table that one. That's a presentation in and of itself, and based on, it's already been an hour, that'd be my recommendation. I kind of put it on there.
What are you talking about?
So it could be number C, letter C rather, just so it could be on there as a recurring future.
Well,
agenda
I
item.
think it's
Yeah.
one of those things that Michael suggested that we have a 20-minute
Can
presentation.
I make a recommendation?
Yep.
Okay. That we should table these, but we should first have an understanding of what's involved.
Yeah,
So that
I mean, I could,
we can approach it a whole lot better if we know what the resource metrics are.
yeah,
What do we do about getting a zoning map and, how to address this, plan for clean water?
Could you make that a concise motion, so
Yes,
know what you're asking.
I make the motion that we do table, C and D, but we need more clarification on what's involved with, zoning map, the resource metric, the plan for clean water. We do need technical assistance for, index of undeveloped lands and environmentally safe sensitive areas. So we do need more clarification on this so that we're better prepared to address those issues. The other thing I'd like to mention is the amount of time that we spend in the council. Is that a set time, or can we address that as part of the meeting today?
well,
Hold on, let's deal with the motion first.
yeah,
Sorry.
deal with the
Okay,
motion.
And I'm not quite sure what the motion is. I think the motion is that we have some sort of an overview of these various areas so we understand more what each one of them means. And then after that, Alex will organize some speakers who can go into more depth
exactly.
and.
You got it.
And until then, it's tabled.
And
Table.
yeah. Is there a second?
Okay.
All in favor? Oh, any discussion?
Well, I think don't you want me to, based on the motion, you want me to explain what I meant by putting that agenda item on there, so you guys can have an idea of what my intentions were when I put it there, right? Isn't that,
Absolutely.
so you made the motion a second, and then in the discussion
Okay,
part,
discussion. There you
yeah,
go.
I think I will kind of address the motion.
Discuss,
There you go.
discuss.
So the zoning map, resource metrics and Monroe County plan for clean water, right? So the zoning map basically guides the build out of the township. And it's important to check to make sure the zoning map takes the context of the surrounding landscape into consideration and deciding on districts. Analyzing resources and indexing sensitive features will also lend more predictability for economic growth, because it'll allow for more redundancy in permitting, so there aren't any, what I call square pegs and round holes. So you don't end up having like an industrial truck terminal right next to a housing development with sensitive wetlands and streams in it, right? So what I had planned on doing was showing kind of the township's streams and floodplains on a map, so you can have kind of a visual understanding of what you're dealing with. I could do it in about 1 minute here, if you want, just so you just are introduced to the matter at hand. I don't need to get too far into the weeds, but at least, so you have the zoning map in front of you, right?
Right.
Now, that's like arguably the most important document for any resident of a township to understand is the zoning map. And so, like, if you look at the map, there's different
Could I
colors,
just
right?
interrupt for a minute?
Yeah.
Aren't the supervisors having some sort of a meeting on zoning tomorrow?
Tomorrow, we're talking about definitions.
Well,
So-
that might be important for,
It's hugely important. It's just, we've had a few issues most recently related to definitions, like warehouse wasn't defined
Yeah.
properly,
No.
had to be redefined, so we all knew what the warehouse is, which in the definition, you know. So we just wanna go do a quick overview, it's gonna take months to edit it, so.
Yeah, so on the screen, there's Smithfield Township. You can see are the water, you can see all the watersheds on there. So if you can see my cursor, that's Marshall's Creek.
Yep.
Down here is the Delaware watershed.
Yep.
This is the Little Sambo here, which is, and then this is the Sambo here. And then this is the Broadhead, the main
Oh,
stem of the Broadhead
okay.
down here, right?
That's the one off of 209,
Yep,
the Little Sambo?
yep.
So that's where that, it used to be that resort on the other side used to be.
Yep. And so this is what the Monroe County plan for clean water, and I can send you all a copy of this link so you can kind of play around in it.
Yeah,
Yep.
And basically, you can click down through these various metrics. This is what I meant by putting that
Oh.
agenda item, the metrics, the resource metrics.
Mm-hmm.
So here you can see, now you see the watersheds, and then you'll have wetland indicators. As you
Oh.
can see, this little watershed here, the
That's
Little
very
Sambo
useful.
has the majority of your municipality's wetlands in it.
Yep.
And then the other important metric to take a look at is gonna be the steep slopes. Wetlands, creeks, rivers, and steep slopes are gonna be your main constraints for kind of building, I guess, if you wanna put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So in your municipality, the National Recreation Area all that red are over 25% steep slopes. So like the ridge down there in Stroudsburg, Joffrey's Ridge.
Is that Moses Knob, the big red one?
Moiser's Knob is down here, and yes, there are some steep slopes there. The yellow are still very steep slopes, but not quite a cliff. So yeah, there's the knob there has a bunch of steep slopes. So does the ridge. The National Rec area has a bunch of steep slopes, but so does the watershed of Marshall's Creek, right? Because if you look here.
Oh, back.
Yeah, so the Marshall's Creek watershed actually has a lot of steep slopes, and that's right along, I think that's 209 there. So all along the 209 corridor, you have these steep slopes.
Which
What-
209
what's
then?
a steep? How do you see a steep?
209 is here, and these red,
Which 209?
group.
We have two 209s.
Are the red steep
So
slopes?
this is the,
The
Oh,
red
traffic
is
circle,
steep,
gotcha.
this is the traffic circle.
Yellow is less steep.
Yeah.
Steep.
You know, when you have steep slopes like
Less
that,
steep.
it's pretty much, it's very challenging to build there. So that would not be a good place, for example, kind of going back to the zoning map, that would be a bad place for like an industrial or commercial zone. Because you can't really, you know, each zone is sort of, and that's pretty much it for the resource overlays. I can leave that up if you want.
You can send us a link?
Yeah, and you can play around with this yourself so you can see
Yeah.
kind of what I was seeing. But if you go back to this map, what I was planning on doing was having the planning commission help us out by putting those resources I just presented on an overlay for the zoning map to see if there's any conflicts between what the land is zoned for versus what you can actually do there because of what's physically there. Like, for example, some of the 209 core, maybe it shouldn't be zoned commercial because it has steep slopes. You see what I'm saying? Set this, like the purple in the middle there, that's zone industrial. There's a lot of wetlands there. Maybe that's not the best place for that. So things like, but we don't know because that exercise has never really been done. And conveniently, the powers of council kind of ordain you to do these sorts of exercises, which is great. And so,
And I think, I mean, from
Yep.
my point of view, I think, in the planning commission, the township years ago, you know, we drove around in a bus, looked around, talked about zoning and adjusting zoning. I mean, obviously, the zoning's already in place and the zone's already in place. That doesn't mean there can't be changes if needed, although you can't have spot zoning. But obviously, in that process, we're looking at features and water features but not necessarily at this technical level. So I think it's helpful to understand this. A lot of times when you're thinking about planning, you're thinking about roads and you're thinking about what makes sense from a road, from a traffic standpoint, which is honestly probably the biggest point. But obviously, that's where this group comes in, is there hasn't been a lot of input on the technical sort of water environmental side to that. Although another argument to be made is you can have a massive industrial zone that is all wetlands. That just means they can't build. doesn't mean it can't still, because there's laws that prevent you from building on that wetland itself. Doesn't mean it can't be industrial, it just means any industrial there will stay wetlands, because you can't build there,
Our wetlands are clearly defined and protected.
yes.
No, wetlands are not clearly defined. They need to be defined on a project by project basis by what's known as wetland delineation.
Every new project must delineate
Yeah,
the wetlands, it doesn't mean that it's already delineated.
most of the wetlands are not delineated in Monroe County.
Right.
I would say at least half of them aren't. And it's also worth noting that over 50% of the wetlands have already been destroyed. So if you were to go back in time to like the 1600s, there would be double the amount of wetlands. All the lakes in your town were once wetlands. There's no natural lakes in your town that I know of, and that's true for most of Pennsylvania. 99% of the lakes were wetlands at one point. This section of the county had a lot of peat bogs. The marshes, the mastodon, I was reading that yesterday. That was a peat bog that they were digging up.
Yeah.
Would have been nice if they hadn't done that, but that's a good example of the sorts of original features. So like Echo Lake, Lake Valhalla, all those lakes you see were once probably peat bogs. So the 50% of wetlands we still have in your township, most of them are in the Little Sandbow watershed there. And that brown color, those are hydric soils, which are wetland indicators, but they need to be delineated to see if there actually are wetlands there. So there's a lot of complexity that goes into these resource overlays. And that's why I thought it'd be good for us to get technical assistance. We don't have the capacity here in-house. We definitely don't have the capacity to do an overlay with the zoning to see if there's any issues either. For example, so anyway, thank you for allowing me to explain why those agenda items were there.
Where we have a motion to table it.
Yep, so that's the motion. There's a motion, there was that discussion as requested. And I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to kind of present to the council on those two agenda items, so.
Well, I think it was very good that you did what you did. That is step one of our getting to understand what's going on. I mean, that kind of an overview, and that was very good, Alex. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay,
My second motion is time. How much time do we spend in the council? What's an appropriate amount of time?
What do you mean, like
right now,
tenure,
should we go home?
or do you mean per meeting?
Per meeting.
I don't know, what was the scheduled meeting, so.
For public meetings, there's no set time limit.
Okay.
I mean, you could theoretically, the council could make bylaws and say like meeting shall end after 1 hour or something like that. I wouldn't recommend that because if you have, let's say there's like 30 people sitting here, which may happen at some point. I think it's important to you have to allow legally for public comment. That can take 2 hours. So I don't think you can.
You're allowed to say that all public comment
Continue
will end at a certain time. But
Yeah.
then you have to continue your meeting at another time that allows them to happen.
Continue the meeting.
I would like to hear what the members would think about timing. Do you have any preferences about, should it be an hour? Should it be no longer than an hour and a half? And then we'll just try to keep to that.
I would say 2 hours and by 10 o'clock latest.
Yeah.
2 hours is reasonable.
Yeah.
It's a great suggestion, Brett.
Eric was gonna say something.
No, I just think that it's a good way to, if there's somebody that's really persistent or, wanted to talk too much, it's a good way to say,
Yeah.
okay, we'll hear you, but let's go home and think about it and come back. So definitely having an end point is good.
Also, I would say if there isn't things to deliberate on and discuss, probably shame on us, because there's obviously lots of stuff to discuss. So maybe I'll just stop there. Probably.
That was good. Not very many people do that. Okay, so do we need to have a motion in relationship to that, or is it just an understanding?
Well, one of the things that makes sense to me is when you have an agenda like this, you time face it.
It
And
does, yeah.
after we've had a couple of these meetings, then in putting together the agenda, you can say, you know, we're gonna spend 10 minutes on this subject, 15 minutes on this subject. And if you have to table something, you table it, and that way you have, for each meeting, you have a target endpoint.
And the
And it
other,
will also help people who wanna go on and on and on, talk about something, to know that that's coming to an end.
well, the other thing is that we as council members need to understand to put some brakes on ourselves sometimes too, so.
On that, what is the intention of how the agenda is gonna be set? Is it you that's setting it as the employee of the township whose responsibility this largely falls under? Or is it the chair, or is it some combination? I know everyone can input into what's going on the agenda, but who's the one that's finally setting the agenda?
That's up to the council. And ultimately, it's up to the supervisors. Since they
Wow.
sort of direct the council, but, you know, it's, I think,
The council can determine its own, I would say the council. One of the beautiful things of advisory councils is that they're not the supervisors, right? I mean, a lot of our councils will have a supervisor on it. But being able to set your own agenda, I mean, I personally love obviously you're in the weeds of this, no pun intended. Where Alex is, I mean, this is his job, is to focus on parks and environment on a daily basis. So this group here is really like, and no, I don't want to say his group, but it's like a great group that he's gonna want to be able to provide input and seek some support from. So I would think an agenda would make sense to come from Alex and the chair, but with input from everybody else, potentially writing to the group saying, we should add this. Does that make sense?
I think right now would be a good idea if everyone did just like email me if you have something you want to see on the agenda. And then, I'll email me and Alex. And then, from there, we'll figure out what the agenda should be. And I think your idea is great about trying to put some time limits on the agenda items.
And that would be the chair's job to do. And I think it'd be your job, you know, especially after this meeting, to make sure the things that you need to have discussed, that you know have to happen.
right,
That she knows so that they get on the agenda.
The thing I want to be sure of is there anything else on the agenda here? We didn't get to the conservation selection guidelines, did we?
no, did you vote on that motion? You did. So I think there was a second motion on the time. Did that ever get resolved at?
On the, oh,
Oh, I think we said.
No, I think we
The motion,
decided.
can I restate the motion? That, the motion is that we put an individual time on each item so that we don't wind up overextending or we don't get, wrapped up too much in the particular subject.
Is that where we were? Let's go back. Is that what?
I don't like that. I don't think so, but I mean, if there's a second motion, if there's a second on that, that's up to the group.
Second,
Well, I will second it, because I believe the agenda should be time-based.
Okay.
okay,
Now we're on discussion. I was trying to say, I think it's the chair's job to manage the time of the group. So I don't think we should have a requirement of a time limit, but unless the chair deems it appropriate, that's my view. The chair should recognize that there's certain things you get through, because there might be something that's critically important, really important, that needs to be discussed, and it's the only thing on the agenda that week. We're gonna spend 2 hours talking about it.
But not that's true, what you're saying, it makes that, yes, exactly. But the point is that we may have a variety of things to discuss, but if we have one particular item, then we go with that subject until we get through it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't wind up bogged down in one particular, so we don't digress from one thing to another.
we're really talking about overall meeting management. And, that just requires all of our cooperation to stay within timeframes and not talk too much and stay on the subject matter. But we do have a motion now. The motion is that we should have some guidelines some time guidelines
Time.
on the agenda. And they'll just be guidelines. How's that, Michael? And I will enforce them if need be.
Or extend them if need.
Okay, was there a second to that?
Yes.
Yes,
it was.
okay. Any more discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay. Now, I'm back to these two items that I think we didn't get to. Should we table those like, do you want to do the draft lighting? Okay, that's short,
I
isn't
think
it?
there was some discussion on the agenda still. I wanted to bring it back to the timing thing, just to keep, then there was some discussion on who sets the agenda and what. My only comment would be that whoever suggests agenda items, please, before you do it, review the 6 things we discussed today. If it's not one of those 6 things, it can't be on the agenda. We can't, you know what I mean? We can't be doing that. We have to stay on, one of the number one reasons that Environmental Advisory Council fails is they get into the weeds on completely random things. You have to stay as council members, it's your responsibility to add agenda items only if they meet the criteria for those 6 things, whereas otherwise directed by the supervisor.
Well, I'd also argue that the chair and Alex as the employee are the ones that decide the agenda. Other people can input into the agenda, but that doesn't guarantee that it goes on the agenda, because again, if there's something that's very critical that needs to be done and it's gonna take 2 hours to discuss it, it doesn't make sense to add on to the agenda an item that might be important in a year or so, but that's ultimately gonna be the chair and Alex's.
Clarity, you're talking about these 6 items?
That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah, if it's something that's not in that purview, I don't think, I mean, Pat can discuss it, but it's not, I don't think it'd be appropriate for this meeting.
Correct.
If it's something like, there's so many things that could fall into the category of environment that aren't appropriate for these types of meetings.
Okay.
Good point. We'll take it.
How
We'll
about-
make,
How about an agenda item like this, and it doesn't fit into these 6 items specifically? I would really like to see us as a council establish 3 priorities that we will accomplish before the end of the year.
a plan.
The 3 most important things. I've heard 2 things that sound like they're environmental in this meeting. One is Sambo Creek as an impaired creek, an impaired stream, and the other one is the park. But if we have some discussion and we talk about what each one of us thinks are the priorities, and then agree on them, and then get concurrence from the supervisors that they're gonna support those as the priorities, because I don't wanna sit here in December and say, I wonder what the heck we did, what did we accomplish?
Yes, so I would, from a supervisor standpoint, I think number 5 is probably the most important. Just because right now, there are funds that exist that the township often has access to, but they all will expire in the next couple of years. And I don't know how true this is, but I'm not sure that there's much direction from the township on priorities for investing in public tax dollars, or most of it's grant dollars, so I guess state tax dollars or federal tax dollars. Often there's a match.
For land acquisition?
For land acquisition, I think the problem is that requires a lot of information to make an educated recommendation on what we should be purchasing, but I know right now, I know Supervisor Lovenheim is out looking at possible things to purchase. I know you've been out looking at things that might be of interest to purchase, because there is access to public funding that wouldn't cost tax dollars. And so there's a general feeling that, oh, we should use this money, and mostly for protection and preservation. But I do think that right now, at least from my standpoint, I haven't seen why we're prioritizing one piece of land over another. Am
Michael,
I right in saying that?
Yeah, I think I agree with that priority. I understand that's also the intent of some of the other supervisors as well. And that was sort of one of the reasons the EAC was put together was to deal with that. And so in terms of priority, the Sambo Creek being appears being addressed with the MS4 permit. It's important, but it's already being addressed in the municipality. This other thing is, so I would say number 4 and 5 on that list would be top priority, because you can't do number 5 unless you have number 4. And number 4 drives most of these other powers as well. So the top thing is to get that index. We need a index. That's critical, because that will allow us to really have meaningful
I
discussion.
think that's absolutely true. Now,
So
so
where do you
what
start?
is our plan to get that?
We would need to request technical assistance from the county planning commission, and also I can reach out to land trust to see if any.
Is that taken care, are you taking care of that? Do we need to do a motion?
So you're talking
You would need to.
our planning commission,
The county planning.
county,
commission.
okay.
You would,
sorry.
we can request technical assistance to help. I would ask for a motion to allow me to actually make the formal ask to get the ball rolling. This is the process.
I'll make that motion
Second,
That's okay.
So the motion is to
for Alex to
technical assistance.
request technical assistance from the county,
planning
commission
commission.
and what was the other group?
And interested land trusts, if they're
And
willing to
land,
help.
and any interest in land trusts, to do what, to assist?
To do number 4, basically.
To help us do number 4, but then who's gonna do the,
One question, the one issue, well, I mean, okay, so there's a motion, I'm sorry, there's a motion on the table. Did someone second it?
Yes,
Or you second?
and.
So my question is, the dollar amount. So one thing you mentioned, oh, we haven't delineated all wetlands. Well, one of the reasons why we have in our zoning requirements that any sort of work that you have to do that first. One of the reasons you do that is it puts it on the applicant to actually pay for that, wetland delineation so that the township isn't spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on doing that for the township. It's probably not realistic to say like, you know what? We really want to know every single bit of wetland in our township. It's just, it would be prohibitively expensive, I think. And so the reason you say, well, if you want to develop your land, if you want to subdivide your land, in fact, if you want to subdivide your land, you need to have wetland delineation. I just want to understand what we're asking for technical support, technical assistance. We need to understand whether there's financial implications to that.
I can talk to Christine at the planning commission to see how much it will cost the township anything to put this together. But I understand that one of the planning commission's responsibilities is to actually help provide this as without cost to the municipality. And if there is any, of course, I'd come back to you guys and say, okay, but this allows me to at least begin the conversation and get into the weeds with them to understand get a timeline.
Groundwork.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Perfect.
Okay, I'm wanna ask, does anybody else do you understand what we're doing here?
I mean, I guess I could just kind of talk a little bit about what we did before and then the other group, and that was lots of discussion on potential acquisitions of, land, open spaces. We would get together, talk about the same 5, 6, 7 potential properties in the township. They were already up on the table, I think, when I got here, most of them. And the idea behind it was that they were identified as properties that had streams on them, lakes, wetlands. They were potentially for sale by the owner. The owner was interested in selling to the township, because obviously that's important. Otherwise, what's the point of, knocking on doors?
Right.
Surveying the land, which comes with a cost.
Yeah.
So the township has to then, so you're identifying, you're getting a written agreement from the landowner to do a survey to get a value, an estimated value on the property. And then from there, go to the township and say, look, so-and-so owns this property. It has, the Marshall's Creek running right through the middle of it. He's either gonna sell it to a developer or he's gonna sell it to the township. And township then makes a decision and puts a price that they're willing to pay for that property. And then the landowner is able to say yes or no.
What happened to that?
All the landowners said no.
Oh,
How long ago was that discussion?
No, I mean, that was happening in pretty much every meeting, but I'm saying.
What was this group? I'm sorry.
And
What was the
every
group?
The environment,
There was an ad hoc open space.
Open
committee here,
space
so
committee.
Open space there.
Yeah, open space committee.
Yeah.
So the open space committee, that's all we did, that's all we talked about, and people would say, oh, I heard that so-and-so is looking to sell his property. The biggest issue with the properties and, the open spaces committee is that the value that was put on land. And let's, for instance, let's say I wanna sell my farm to the township. 45 acres, barn, whatever, in the proposal, the person who lives there would get life rights. And then after that person dies, usually, the town is then the property is turned over to the township. And you can do park, whatever you wanna do on it. But if my property was worth, let's say, $1 million, then usually the price tag, or the offer would be around 300,000. Now, of course, you're getting paid $300,000 for a piece of property that you're allowed to live on for the rest of your life. But a lot of the times the offer wasn't, good enough for anybody to say, yes, this is something I'm interested in. I think that you have to be very, you gotta love the township, you gotta love the politicians, you gotta, there's a lot that goes into that, so.
Well, I think, and to your point, I think it would be useful to have someone from a land trust come and chat about, using that mechanism as well, to acquire land. I'm curious about the surveys. Was that something that, did you go back to the township to make a formal action from the township that they would do a survey? Because that's spending money usually.
Township paid.
You're referencing appraisals.
Appraisals, yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
appraisals.
It was,
It
yeah,
cost money.
it would usually be a survey of the land and then an appraisal, yeah.
Oh, because there's alternatively another way that the supervisors could put a resolution in place or that allocates a certain amount of funds that can be used by this council to conduct appraisals.
Yes.
That means it doesn't have to go back and forth every time. Gives a little bit more autonomy, something to think about.
So how long ago was it that this ad hoc committee was operating?
I think that the last, it's been going on, there's talk, but I think that the last real work that happened was 2 years ago, roughly,
So that's.
a year and a half
That's
ago.
fairly recent.
yeah. I forgot it.
2 years ago.
Eric was gonna see if he had any.
Pardon me?
There's
Yeah.
money out there for municipalities. So.
Yeah, if you don't,
It's for the president.
yeah.
But I thought he said that nobody wanted to sell.
Yeah, just because there's money doesn't mean that there's
Right.
sellers.
So there
Maybe
were 5
reasons for that.
properties identified and the whole thing
Well,
got nowhere.
Mitch,
because-
there may be reasons for that. Like if they were targeting the Marshalls Creek owners, those are all commercial lots.
Right.
Doesn't really, like, you're not gonna get open space values for land that's owned commercially. There's real reasons for that, and I think that.
Well, the other thing is
you know.
if you target. Yeah,
There's a lot of properties around Mount Nebo.
So I don't mean to interfere with business, but do you wanna vote on that motion?
what was the motion again? Sorry, what were we talking about?
To request technical assistance from the
Yes.
County Planning Commission and the
Yes.
land trusts.
It is to help to help create an index, not keep one.
And identify if there's any cost associated with that.
All in favor?
Uh,
Aye.
I have a question. If water is the highest value asset, one of the highest value assets that the township has, what is our plan for protecting it? And if somebody wants to develop the water, what are the lengths we're willing to go to protect the water going forward? Pardon my naivete, but it seems like it's just, we've been eating away at the water resources year after year. And maybe it's our mission here to protect that. And how do we do that? And where do the funds come to do that? Seems to me that's the key issue to me.
Well, I would say from powers of council number 1, if you're identifying one of those things as a problem and there is a specific solution, then that could eventually become a recommendation that would go to the supervisors to invest public resources in that solution. But there'd have to be identifiable problem that you're trying to talk about and a clear solution that can have a price tag on it. So what lengths, what, I mean, my thought on this is the lengths are, you know, how this council should come up with recommendations and ideally put a price tag on them, and then it's up to supervisors to determine whether it's something that.
Well, my thought as I was reading all this and thinking about it too, is that there's research that needs to be done. I mean, we don't have all the information in order to come up with that. And so seems to me like in other groups that I've been in, that if that is an important issue, if we all think that's an important issue, then we ought to make it such, as you said, that that is an objective. And then we ought to get some of the council here willing to begin work on it
I think,
along with
I
that.
think we brought that up with, tabling C and D, right? So we can get, information, we get a starting point. Cause then now we're gonna be learning.
Yes, but I think what I'm suggesting is that it's a bigger issue that we need to think about in relationship to the kind of work that's gonna have to be done.
Exactly. What I'm saying is that it's a gradual buildup because since this council hasn't met in several years, from what you've been saying, then we're reestablishing, you're saying we're starting anew. So we're gonna develop everything that's gonna be recommended, correct?
Yeah, we're gonna basically
We're
do
doing that.
due diligence.
Right.
Yep, it's exactly what we're doing now.
So we need that due diligence.
Yep.
In order to.
That's a good way to say it.
Can I
Afterward.
also say, you know, again, to that point 4, and one of the first things I actually asked for, and then I realized Alex had just sort of started, so I was giving him some breathing space, but I'm not even sure we have an index, not just of open space environmental sensitive areas, but of an index of open space and environmental sensitive areas that the township owns. Just the public ones, let alone all of it in the township. And I would argue, I'd love to see that first. No, I'd love, show me a map of all the public land that exists, state, national, county, and township that currently own, you know, knowing that, understanding that. And then the other part of this, it's an index of open space and sensitive areas. But also getting an understanding of, you know, we're supposed to have, for the purpose of obtaining information on the proper use of such areas, but also to understand the state of it. I mean, again, this is maybe the parks group, but I mean, I hear people saying this park is not in good working order, this one's falling apart. I love to understand what are the priorities for the, maybe again, I don't know, maybe there's a way this group can do some of that as well as it relates to parks, at least as it relates to.
That's an excellent idea because this zoning doesn't take in the national park.
That is, I know for a fact that the planning commission can vary, if they're willing to help provide technical assistance, but they can vary. I don't know what the timeline is. Again, I need to talk to them, but your request is 100% something they can simply bring something like this out for one of our meetings and answer the question. It's one of the beauties of GIS,
Yeah.
that those sorts of, that information can be visually represented.
Well, we've had a motion and agreed to it, that you're going to contact them, and I think that's the next step.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I worry about as in, on number 5, what I worry about on deciding to, you know, make acquisitions of property is not only, okay, that's the best property we should own, but can we actually do a better job of protecting it and doing what this group wants the township to do? Or will we let it go into ruin and not have the capacity? So if you give me all the money in the world and I can buy everything, I don't think we should do that because I'm not, as a township, because I don't know that we have the resources to maintain it, to support it. So it's just another piece that I think we need to keep in mind when making recommendations on parcels is what are we doing with the current parcels that the township already owns?
It's a good question. It's a good point, Better. Like, let's say there's a great parcel that has like 7 homes on it, and those all need to be demolished. It's a great open space, but it's gonna cost you $1 million to demolish a home. Probably not a good parcel to purchase from a municipal standpoint. That's a bad example, of course, but I think that kind of speaks a little bit to what you're saying.
Well, and also I think what I'm saying is, all right, well, maybe we already own a parcel with wetlands and we're not doing a good job of preserving it now. So
It's interesting.
let's make sure before taking on more responsibility, that we're accountable for, what we've already done in the past.
The other thing here, it says you have a conceptual conservation network map.
Where's this?
That's on the draft of the Smithfield Township Conservation Selection Guidelines.
We didn't get to that.
We didn't get to that yet. I just thought of something, Michael. So when preparing for this meeting, as you can imagine, I prepared a lot for this meeting. And I think actually it's gone very well. And I thank you all for your patience and understanding. But I was thinking about how do you protect land? There's 3 ways to protect land that we can do as a municipality. Number 1 is a direct acquisition. Okay, as Mike was referencing, like we will, so that's number 1. Number 2 is you can put a conservation, or somebody can put a conservation easement over the land. That allows the property owner to continue to live there and have the land. It's just that they cannot build on it. You give away your development rights. Number 3 is the township can simply zone it differently to be more protective. A good example of that is Stroud Township's Cherry Valley region. I believe most of that region is zoned conservation. All those property owners still have right to sell their property and do what they want within the guidelines of the zoning district, but it's more protective than other zoning districts. So that's, in my opinion, 3 ways to protect land. The third one doesn't cost us anything, but it does require a lot of due diligence and planning. So there's a lot of, and the conservation easements are usually more agreeable for property owner because it allows them to live there, no public access, but the land's protected. Maybe it's a key watershed acreage area where if the land is protected by somebody, at least the water quality downstream will be improved.
And that would be an example of 1B, something that, right? Something that this group might recommend, some sort of conservation district for some area as a solution to protection and improvement of the quality of the environment.
Alice, would you be sure the minutes reflect those 3 things that you just said? Yeah, because I think that's important. We can come back to that as we, would anyone like to move we adjourn? And
I just have a really quick question. Where are we on the things that we've discussed and are we at the bottom here?
B and C were tabled, and the only thing that's left for discussion is F.
Okay, well then, yeah, really quickly,
well, I think, shouldn't we table that?
because it just, I have a question for you about the 3 things that can be done. At what point, or are we able to also suggest ordinances that directly affect the environmental, a change or a new ordinance that would, for instance,
You mean as a council?
yeah,
Yeah, so the council may review environmental aspects of complex land development plans. Like, let's say a developer comes in with a big warehouse, they want to get a few waivers to impact wetlands and steep slopes, things like that. I hope the council be willing to make a recommendation of the planning commission and the supervisors on some of those matters. And then with ordinances, if they were to look at ordinances from a strictly environmental perspective.
Yes.
Like there are lighting standards that are currently being updated. That draft is not yet ready for the council to review, but I hope they'll look at that from the lens of environment.
good.
How would,
Consider
can I just ask from a process standpoint, how would that go into a land development process?
It would be.
Would you need the supervisors to request feedback? Would the planning commission request input from? I mean, we have an engineer that's paid to do that.
Yeah, I
To some
think,
degree, at least as it relates to following our ordinances.
yeah, I think, because I brought this up with Robert before, and it's just something that we can all think about. Towns in Vermont, right? They're lighting for their parking lots. You need an engineer to tell you how many parking lots or how many lights you need in your parking lot, right?
We have that too.
But, are your lights allowed to shine directly up? Are they gonna be 7,000 watt, monstrosities that light up the night sky?
So our ordinances also do have that. I don't necessarily agree with how the enforcement is done on this, but,
With a BB gun?
no, I don't want to get too off topic. Too off topic, but there is there's requirements in the land development, which basically means you cannot do something new.
Yeah.
And there was some discussion against the planning commission that, that might not apply to existing lighting, although I don't know that that's the right interpretation of that from our zoning officer. However, regardless, there's now a lighting, ordinance to be reviewed by the planning commission.
We're-
On its
So, we'll give you an update since.
We are reviewing that, that ordinance. We
I-
did dark skies. We decided that it's gonna be, I guess, a it's, there's the standalone, the Smithfield and the dark skies, and they're all incorporated together.
Okay.
Yeah, those standards are currently being drafted up, and I want to get back to your question.
this way we don't-
Procedurally, how do recommendations from this body influence land development? It would basically be a written recommendation to the planning commission, and James would essentially deliver that message to the planning commission when those aspects of any land development plan are up for vote. It would simply be a recommendation. Same thing to the supervisors. It would go before the supervisors, what this body decides as a recommendation, and they would take that into consideration with the engineering review and everything else.
Does that require a resolution from the supervisors that copies of any land development be sent? I mean, it's easy to say this group should do it, but there might be a bunch. I don't know that I recommend making taking action on that until we know exactly what that process might look like.
It should be,
Because there's
it
timeframes
is,
on
it
these
is
things.
an environmental issue.
There's already a lot of timeframes around the planning commission, so if you act, county planning commission township, so if this group has to review it too, it just, things have to sync up, and then it also doesn't mean there probably needs to be a resolution or even a change in the ordinance.
Yeah, and that's a great question for your solicitor, and I wouldn't want to comment and be wrong.
But
it's a
that's
really-
my one homework, I'll find out.
Thank you, sir. But, and I think that's what it would kind of look like.
Mhm.
And so that's the intent of having a supervisor representative and a planning commission representative, I think, is for that collaborative purpose, because civic engineers are great. But they don't necessarily always have the environmental background as to, you know, let's say they want to impact the forested buffer of an exceptional value wetland. From an engineering standpoint, maybe they'd say yes, but maybe it's, not the greatest idea from an environmental standpoint. So, and that's just a bad example, but it's something that may come up.
I think there's a place, I know we basically made a motion, to adjourn, but one area that it might be easier to come into play is on conditional uses. Because that is an area where it's the supervisor's prerogative to add as many conditional uses as might be necessary. So it's not specifically the engineer that reviews this, does it meet our ordinance requirements that relate to wetlands and all that sort of thing, but also if we want to go over and above that, the engineer doesn't often sort of make those recommendations because it's sort of a little bit more black and white. But in a conditional use hearing, sometimes supervisors might want that, seek that input. So
Which is a
just
great point about
I
conditional
thought there's
use,
another way to do that.
conditional use and waivers too.
And waivers too, to know whether we should accept the waiver.
I think the waiver issue is important.
Yeah, that's that's great.
With lighting, lighting's taking a turn to, these LEDs they're great, but they emit more light than sometimes we actually.
Yeah, but you should, as long as they're done properly, they're better.
I walk now.
I'll make a motion to table, because we didn't actually approve the Smithfield
No, we
Township Conservation
didn't.
Selection Guideline. I'll make a motion, we table this, and we table the environmental consideration for draft lighting standards. Oh, that's just an update, I guess we did that already.
We're,
So, yeah, sorry, I'm motioning we're gonna table this, because I want to do that before you.
I second.
any discussion?
No.
We have a forum even without Eric.
Yeah.
All in favor, aye?
What is the quorum requirement for this group?
This is a body of 7, so 4.
4.
I think just make sure, I hate to be a
Usually it's a
stickler, but
majority,
make
so.
sure you ask for public comment before adjourn, motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Well, I have a question before we adjourn. What are we supposed to do between now and the next time we get together, if it's gonna be a month away?
Good question. You've asked me to put some stuff together, like that link will be sent to you. I'm gonna have a conversation with the county planning commission and a number.
We'll get the minutes.
It'll be the.
Alex, you're gonna send that
minutes.
link for that map that you have?
Yes, yes, I will send that link. And I will keep you appraised. And I will communicate closely with Pat. And we will set the agenda. And if there's anything me and Pat feel that the council needs to review in preparation for next meeting, we'll let you know via email.
And all the things that we didn't discuss
Further request.
today will be on the agenda. Okay.
Okay, do I hear a motion that we,
I'll move.
You got a public comment?
Oh, public comment.
are there any other public comments?
Well, I'll just, this may be relevant or not, but every day that I drive by Smithfield, the Smithfield project.
Gateway?
Gateway.
The Gateway project. I look at all that dirt being moved and I see these gigantic, what do you call it, culverts, whatever, tubes, and I'm wondering what's going, where's that water going? You know, I'm hoping that whoever engineered that project is doing the right thing. That's all I'm, you know, it's just a public comment. I
Yeah,
wonder
there was a
who's-
lot of stormwater management, and I can tell you that there's no way the developer wants to do that, because it costs them a lot of money.
See all the equipment that's
Yeah,
there.
I mean, the biggest part of what you've seen so far has been all the stormwater. I mean, I was a planning commission member at the time, but there was a lot of stormwater management plans submitted for.
Where is the Gateway project?
Motion.
209 and 447.
Is that what St. Luke's? Yeah,
Where St. Luke's is.
Yeah, it's
right
right by,
around my corner.
it's right by the 309 exit. off
Yeah,
eight.
I got it.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was called Gateway.
And that developer attitude is very common.
Yeah, I'm not saying he had that attitude, I'm just saying.
No,
I suspect, based on, like you said, whatever common person is, he's not doing all those culverts because they want to, but because they were required to by.
But this is by the state and the powers.
No, by our township code.
Okay, and we're supervising what they're doing? Is that, it's being inspected by our people or who's doing that?
No, I can answer that.
That's not a Ken thing. Yeah, go ahead.
So you're asking about the stormwater culverts?
I'm just wondering, you know, I just drive by and I'm wondering if all this work is being done properly, that's all.
The township has a stormwater ordinance. And before any earth disturbance takes place, a landowner must obtain, if it's more than an acre, they have to obtain a chapter 102 permit through the PADEP, which is stormwater management, which controls erosion and sediment control, and also rate and volume. And the stormwater ordinance has various districts. So here, as you get closer to the mouth of the Broadhead Creek, where it has a confluence with the Delaware, they ask that the discharge be quickly released into the creek as opposed to retained on site in headwater areas. So, you know, some of those culverts might be in an attempt to get that stormwater into the creek and away from the site as quickly as possible. Without knowing exactly which property you're talking about, I can't really speculate.
Oh, I'm just looking at the whole complex. I mean, there's a lot of acreage involved.
Like, you know, when you're driving on 80 and you look to the left, there's the paper mill and you see that big culvert they built. That's for stormwater conveyance down in the Broadhead Creek from the site, because that's the drainage basin. I hope, is that kind of what
Yeah, but my general question though is that Smithfield Township is responsible for and is managing how this project is going
the
forward.
DEP manages it.
Which is, has more
Okay,
teeth.
that's my question.
And more, they have more teeth and better ability. to-
And that's a state agency, correct?
It is
Federal?
the Conservation District and the Northeastern Regional Office work collaboratively with municipalities to make sure that land development occurs in compliance with the regulations set forth in the 102 permit,
Okay.
which is.
Including inspections.
Right, including regular inspections. So there's, one of the things Monroe County does better than many other places in the Commonwealth, because we had special protection creeks, we do stormwater management exceedingly well. There's other things we don't do so great, but one thing we do very well and we have the stormwater. So not all, so- and this municipality has a very strong stormwater ordinance too. Smithfield, you're very fortunate to have supervisors that put a strong stormwater ordinance in place. So, you know, we're fortunate in that sense. So what you're seeing is actually a lot of due diligence.
Thank you.
Well,
That's my public comment.
excellent comment.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Eric. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh.
Good job, guys.
Eric?
Yeah.
We're cut, my land runs up, it's your land, somewhere.
Neighbor?
I